By early 1945, Europe was collapsing into ruins. The Allies had crossed the Rhine, Berlin was within reach, and the German war machine was fighting on borrowed time. Yet, on the battlefields of northern Germany, one weapon still commanded respect: the Panther. Sleek, powerful, and deadly at range, it had become the backbone of Hitler's armored resistance. American Shermans and British Cromwells could overwhelm it through numbers, but rarely through firepower. For British crews, each encounter with a Panther meant fighting an opponent that could kill them before they ever got close enough to strike back. It wasn't supposed to be that way. Britain, the nation that had invented the tank in the Great War, had spent much of the second stumbling through design philosophies. There were infantry tanks, slow and heavily armored, meant to crawl forward with the men. And there were cruiser tanks, fast and agile, designed to exploit breakthroughs. But by Normandy, this split had become an anchor. The Churchill tanks lumbered forward like steel fortresses, and the Cromwells raced ahead like lightning. Neither capable of both speed and survival, British commanders had watched with frustration as the balance tilted. American divisions relied on the dependable M4 Sherman, simple, reliable, and easily upgraded. Soviet forces surged forward behind the T-34, a marvel of wartime production and adaptability. But British armored units faced an uneasy truth. Their best designs were still compromises. The Challenger could mount a 17-pounder gun, but it was tall, awkward, and thinly armored. The Firefly packed power, but its recoil and cramped turret made it brutal on its own crews. What Britain needed was something new, fast, reliable, and able to meet the Panther on equal terms. That answer would come from within its own ranks. Beneath the smoke and exhaustion of 1944, British engineers at Leland and Birmingham were quietly building a tank that few outside design circles even knew existed, a stopgap project intended to bridge the gap between the Cromwell and the yet unfinished Centurion. They called it the A34 Comet. When it finally rolled into service, it did what few expected. It wasn't revolutionary in shape or size, but it was the first British tank since 1939 that crews described with pride. It could move faster than most expected, strike with near the same power as a 17-pounder, and survive hits that would have destroyed its predecessors. The Comet would arrive too late to change the war's outcome, but not too late to prove that Britain could still build a tank that frightened the enemy. The Comet's creation was not the product of a grand announcement or sweeping reorganization. It was born quietly, almost reluctantly, out of British necessity. By 1943, the War Office had already been chasing a dream called the Centurion, a next-generation tank meant to blend speed, firepower, and protection into a single vehicle. But the Centurion's development was slow, and the front could not wait. The Cromwell, though fast, lacked the muscle to deal with Panthers and Tigers. The Challenger, while mounting the fearsome 17-pounder, was ungainly and under-armored. The British needed something in between, and they needed it quickly. Designers at Leland Motors and the Tank Board decided on a pragmatic approach. Instead of designing an entirely new tank, they would improve what already worked. The Cromwell chassis, with its robust Rolls-Royce Meteor engine and Christie suspension, became the foundation. Its strengths were obvious: speed, mechanical reliability, and a low profile that made it difficult to spot and hit. The weaknesses were equally clear: limited armor and a gun that could not reliably pierce the frontal plate of a Panther. The solution was to keep the Cromwell's agility but give it a harder punch. To achieve that, British engineers developed a new weapon, the 77mm high-velocity gun. Despite its name, it fired the same 76.2mm shells as the 17-pounder, but from a shorter cartridge case, producing less recoil and making it easier to fit inside a compact turret. The loss in velocity was only about 10%, a trade-off many crews considered more than acceptable given its improved handling and accuracy. The 77mm HV could still penetrate the frontal armor of a Panther at medium range and destroy a Panzer IV or Jagdpanzer without difficulty. The turret that housed this weapon was an entirely new design. Lower and better balanced than that of the Challenger, it offered improved visibility through a commander's cupola, a first for British cruiser tanks. Armor thickness ranged from 76mm on the front to 25mm on the roof, giving crews a real sense of protection without sacrificing too much weight. At 33 tons, the Comet was heavier than the Cromwell but still nimble, reaching speeds up to 30 miles per hour. The wide 18-inch tracks distributed its weight better across muddy terrain, allowing it to maneuver in conditions that bogged down heavier tanks. The result was a remarkably balanced machine, fast enough to exploit breakthroughs, tough enough to survive ambushes, and powerful enough to challenge German armor head-on. It was not the biggest or the strongest tank of the war, but it represented something Britain had been missing for years. A design that finally made sense. By the time the first Comets rumbled off production lines in late 1944, the war in Europe had already turned decisively against Germany. Yet, the Wehrmacht's retreat was far from a rout. Across Holland and into the North German plain, the remnants of German armored divisions fought with a ferocity born of desperation. Into this brutal, fluid battlefield came the British 11th Armoured Division, the first to receive the new Comet tank. Training began almost immediately. Crews who had spent years inside Cromwells were startled by how familiar the Comet felt, and how much more confident it made them. The Meteor engine growled with power, and the new 77mm gun inspired genuine respect. After years of compromise, British tankers finally had a machine that didn't feel like a stopgap. It was sleek, quiet, and capable of keeping pace with the fast-moving Allied advance without breaking down every 50 miles. By January 1945, as the Allies prepared to cross the Rhine, Comets rolled into their first combat operations. In the wooded countryside of northern Germany, the 11th Armored Division encountered the last of Hitler's armor. German Panthers and Jagdpanzer IVs lurked in ambush positions, covering the retreating infantry columns. In those engagements, the Comet's combination of speed and stability gave it a crucial edge. Crews could fire accurately on the move, something few British tanks before them could manage, and reposition before the enemy could return fire. One of the most famous Comet engagements occurred in April 1945 near the Essel bridgehead. A troop of Comets from the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment stumbled upon a Tiger tank, the feared F-01, commanded by one of Germany's last experienced panzer crews. The first Comet in the column was struck and destroyed by 2 88mm rounds. But the others didn't back down. Using their speed and tight maneuverability, the remaining Comets flanked the Tiger through the forest, catching it broadside. A single 77mm shot penetrated the side armor, detonating its ammunition. When the smoke cleared, the once invincible Tiger lay burning, a testament to how far British tank design had come. The Comet's success wasn't measured in numbers destroyed, but in the confidence it gave its crews. They could now advance without feeling like they were charging to certain death. In the final months of the war, the Comet became a symbol of redemption for Britain's armored forces, proof that they could finally face the German panzers on equal terms. By the spring of 1945, word had spread through British armored regiments. The Comet was different. Crews who had long dreaded facing German armor now spoke with a sense of quiet pride. The old caution, the fatal hesitation when spotting a panther's silhouette in the treeline, began to fade. The Comet wasn't invincible, but for the first time, British tankers felt they had a fighting chance. The Panther, introduced in 1943, had terrified Allied crews. Its sloped frontal armor could shrug off most Allied shells, and its long 75mm KWK-42 gun could destroy a Sherman or Cromwell at over 1,500 meters. Yet, the Panther's strengths came with trade-offs. Its weight made it sluggish over mud, its mechanical reliability was questionable, and its tall profile made it easier to spot. Against that, the Comet presented a different kind of enemy, one that could move faster, aim quicker, and exploit the slightest weakness. In controlled tests and in the field, the Comet's 77mm high-velocity gun proved lethal at medium ranges. Armor-piercing discarding sabot rounds could penetrate 120mm of armor at 500 meters, enough to punch through the Panther's sides and rear with ease, and even threaten the front at closer ranges. The gun's shorter recoil stroke and balanced turret design allowed faster target reacquisition. While the 17-pounder Firefly had greater theoretical power, its recoil, cramped breech, and slower reloads made it less practical in mobile combat. The Comet, by contrast, could fire, move, and fire again, a rhythm of attack that made it deadly in the fluid fights of 1945. Crews described the Comet as responsive and forgiving. Its Meteor engine gave smooth acceleration, while the wide tracks and improved suspension offered stability over broken ground. The lower silhouette reduced its visibility, making it easier to conceal behind hedgerows or rubble. Even inside, it felt more human. There was room to breathe, better optics for the commander, and more intuitive controls. Against the Panther, the Comet's design philosophy showed its worth. Rather than meeting brute force with brute force, it combined British engineering restraint with tactical practicality. And in the broader picture, that balance mattered. Where the Panther relied on shock and power, the Comet relied on versatility. It could duel tanks, support infantry, or race ahead to exploit breakthroughs. It didn't need to dominate a battlefield, only to survive it. In the closing months of the war, that subtle advantage helped the Comet outlast and outmaneuver opponents built for a conflict already slipping away. When the war ended in May 1945, the Comet had only just begun to show its full potential. Roughly 1,200 were built, far fewer than the thousands of Shermans or Cromwells that had rolled before them, but the crews who fought in them remembered the Comet as the tank that finally got everything right. It was Britain's long-delayed answer to the Panther, and though it arrived too late to shape the outcome of the war, its influence was just beginning to end the chaotic aftermath of victory. British tank units across occupied Germany found themselves in a rare position. They had a vehicle that didn't need immediate replacement. The Comet was fast, dependable, and battle-proven. Regiments that had once cycled through tanks every year now held on to theirs with a kind of affection. Even mechanics praised its relative simplicity. Fewer breakdowns, easier engine access, and a transmission that didn't require constant prayer. It was, as one officer later wrote, the first British tank we trusted with our lives without doubting the designers. Yet even as crews grew attached to their Comets, the engineers back home were already moving forward. The A34 had been conceived as a stopgap, a bridge to something greater, and that bridge led directly to the A41 Centurion. Many of the Comet's design principles, from its sloped armor to its improved visibility and suspension, were refined and expanded in the Centurion project. The result would become one of the most successful tank designs of the 20th century. But without the lessons of the Comet, the Centurion might never have emerged as it did. The Comet's own service life extended far beyond Britain's post-war occupation. It was exported to numerous nations, from Ireland to South Africa, from Finland to Myanmar, serving in training and frontline roles well into the 1960s and, in some cases, the 1970s. In Ireland, one particularly battered Comet became legendary after an accident destroyed its turret. Engineers improvised, bolting a 90mm recoilless rifle onto its hull, the bizarre yet fittingly British headless coachman. Though overshadowed by its successor, the Comet represented a turning point. It was the moment British tank design rediscovered balance between protection and mobility, firepower and practicality. In the great lineage of armor, it stood as a quiet redemption. It lacked the fame of the Tiger or the numbers of the Sherman, but for the crews who drove it, it embodied something greater than statistics. The feeling that, at last, Britain had built a tank worthy of its soldiers. In the end, the Comet was a paradox. A tank designed as a temporary measure that proved timeless in its impact. It never captured the public imagination like the Churchill or the Sherman, and it was quickly eclipsed by the Centurion's fame. But for those who fought in it, the A34 Comet was the culmination of every lesson Britain had learned the hard way. It was the tank that finally united speed, power, and survivability in a single coherent design. A harmony that had eluded British engineers since the first prototypes clattered across the test fields of the 1930s. On the battlefield, it earned quiet respect. German crews came to recognize it as the low one that moved too fast, and Allied units noted how rarely it broke down compared to older models. Even historians, often preoccupied with the legends of Tiger and T-34, have gradually come to acknowledge its place in the lineage of great armored fighting vehicles. It wasn't glamorous, but it was efficient, and in war that often matters most. The Comet story is a reminder that innovation doesn't always arrive in sweeping revolutions. Sometimes it comes from refinement, from taking what is good and making it better, from choosing balance over extremes. The Comet did not win the Second World War, but it ensured that Britain's tank crews would never again face the enemy outgunned or outrun. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Britain's forgotten Comet, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. More untold stories of World War II engineering are coming soon.